Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And if you want to keep up with all things Clown Decade, of course, subscribe to the channel and of course become a member. And today we are mourning the Tory party. They're not quite dead yet, however they are very much on a road where we can barely see a recovery. But you have absolutely everybody on Tory payroll, or at the very least has their social life revolving around the Tory party, trying to basically channel the feeling of the famous meme of the dog surrounded by fire telling you this is fine. It is very much not fine, and as we will go through, every time a Tory is asked off the record what they think is going on, they are very much of the understanding that this is fatal for them. They're running out of money, they're running out of activists that actually want to be part of the Tory party. All they really have left are people in the media and dinosaur donors who are basically just continually donating to the party because they either forgot that they are donating to the party with a direct debit, or as mentioned before, it's entirely to do with the social life. Like the Lib Dems, it's just turning into a social club. You have a party that lasts that long and has a complete collapse, what else will it exist as? A complete shell of its former self that do little more than try and copy other actual innovative parties. The main point generally everyone is pushing is that when it comes to the main stage, you have debates and speeches that generally have an awful lot of free seating. Now this is definitely one of the worst examples, however, to be absolutely fair, it is a members' debate on free speech. However, there are only 55 people in the audience, and typically in the past you would expect it to be at least a quarter full, maybe even half full, but this time it's basically empty. And in the replies you had people saying, well, I saw it full earlier for the leader's speech, which you would naturally obviously expect. It is the Tory party leader after all. Though I will note that I cannot find any pictures of the audience front to back. It's typically only the first set of rows that anyone is actually bothering to photograph when it comes to Kemi's speech. Still, as you can see, it's a lot more full, but you would expect that from the leader's speech, and on top of that, it's a relatively small conference area that obviously pales in comparison to the effective rally that Reform had. And as we'll go into later, there were people in Voxbox basically saying, I've never known Tory conferences to be so empty, so it's definitely on their minds that the Tory conference is, well, effectively dead this year, certainly compared to previous years. Clearly the party line on day two was to try and say, try and claim that day two is really full, just say that for some reason people didn't turn up on a Sunday, which should be your big day, given it's at the weekend, with Reem Ibrahim, who works for the IEA, which is one of the many think tanks that's just a pipeline into the Tory party, saying, oh look, there's a big queue to get into the Tory party, which again, I have to be honest, yet again, just thinking back to previous conferences, outside the conference hall it's usually bustling. This looks like a bread line. However, we skip over to Mel Stride's speech, who is the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, I should say, the second biggest position on the opposition benches, and it's half empty. It's more than half empty, in fact. People just don't care. This is your Chancellor who is supposed to be telling you about Tory economic policy, how they're going to deal with the economy, because realistically, they know now. You can't talk about immigration. You try and talk about immigration, you look like a fake version of Nigel Farage. So why don't we call them all socialists, which nobody buys, by the way, but they're trying it anyway, and try and say, listen, we're going to keep the economy in good stead. Which is still a really hard argument for them to make, but they are still going ahead with the line that, we can do better than Reform, because Reform are promising to get rid of the two-child benefit cap and cut taxes. In other words, spend more and tax less, which is obviously against the idea of what they're supposed to do. Ignoring all the savings made from immigration that they're promising, of course. But the problem you have is that the Tories are still trying to effectively do bribery too, with the idea of giving the young a tax rebate when they get their first job to help them try and move house. It's like £5,000 worth, and other bits and pieces that in total mean there is going to be about 5 billion less in the public purse. Guess what? That's the same with winter fuel allowance and two-child benefit cap put together, by the way. It's about 5 billion. So Tories trying to say, we'll be stewards of the economy. Well, their costs are the same as Reform, so it doesn't even fly. But anyway, the Telegraph did a decent vox pop of people around the conference, and we're quickly going to pick out some highlights.
I don't think anyone thinks that we're going to have a majority in the next election, but I think with Jenrick in charge, we've got more chance of stopping the tide. At the minute, we just look at how empty it is. I've never seen a Tory conference this empty.
Yeah, this is what I mean. It's almost like a wake. It's like going to a dying relative's bedside. And depending which type of Tory you talk to, it's very much all different stages of denial. This man's basically at the bargaining stage. Oh, if we just have Jenrick in charge, we can stem the tide and hopefully recover something. No, I'm afraid that's not happening. Jenrick would probably actually be worse than Kemi Badenoch at this point, for the simple reason alone that I don't know why people forget this, but he was immigration minister for over a year. And while official records may show that he was against the whole Afghan scheme, the truth of the matter is that he was for a certain amount of the Afghan scheme, and on top of that, did not use his parliamentary privilege to tell us that the Afghan scheme was currently going on, and that 100,000, possibly more, Afghans were secretly brought over to the United Kingdom to be given refugee status. And yes, that is costing taxpayer money. If he was leading the Tory party, that would be Reform's line of attack, and it would be absolutely devastating.
Do you think that Robert Jenrick should try and do a coalition, Reform UK?
Probably not right now. I think the big problem we will have is if someone like Robert Jenrick leaves the party to join Reform, then I think it's done. I think it's game over.
Number one, Robert Jenrick isn't joining Reform simply for the fact that he was immigration minister and did absolutely nothing useful. Secondly, you've pretty much already had this. Danny Kruger leaving, pretty much by everyone, was seen as, and I've heard it described as, Tory 9/11. Losing Danny Kruger, who was a key Robert Jenrick ally, was absolutely devastating. And again, Tories are just in denial. Most of them, the official line is effectively denial. As I say, you vox pop everyone and they're just at different stages of it. Tories that I'm quite good friends with, they're pretty much at acceptance, I think, because we talk about how devastating the Tory party has been for the past 14 years and how devastated they have been since losing out on the last election. And as I've said in a few videos before, there were only really two reasons to join the Tory party for the last 14 years or so. Certainly the last decade, anyway. One was to have a better chance of getting a seat. For example, Rory Stewart jumped from Labour to Lib Dem to Tory simply to try and become an MP and maybe one day PM. And if it's not for people like that, which is why more than that, most Tory MPs are Lib Dems, it's because of basically a social life. And we're talking Emily Hewitson and quite a few people at GB News who are still largely on the Tory side of things. It's because all their friends are Tories, and it's entirely to do with their social life. They'll be doing dinners, parties, events constantly. They're not particularly there for the policy. They're NPCs. They'll say whatever their party says they should say. They're there for upper middle class dinner parties and then to go out on the lash with other people who, let's face it, are a bit odd. Because you have to be a bit odd to be right-wing just as a default. But on top of that, if you join the Tory party, which is openly saying, I don't want to make many friends outside of this particular circle, then you have to be a special type of strange, which I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of Tories that are still Tories are quite open about that. Whereas I never particularly had that affinity, so I found it quite easy to, leave the Tories and join Reform.
Farage, Reform UK, there is an argument that now they've taken over as the right-wing party in the UK. Do you think that's correct?
No, they're kind of the fascist party in the UK.
Yeah, I've said in the past that generally the membership are a bit more based than the parliamentary party, but you've got to bear in mind that an awful lot of the membership is still Lib Dems, and in fact, the proportion of people who are Lib Dems in the Tory party has grown quite a bit over the past year, which makes it quite funny. You're probably quite close to a point where the MPs are actually more right-wing than the membership, because the Tories have finally figured out, being right-wing actually wins you elections, as if they didn't know that from Margaret Thatcher. But the problem is it's too late. Most of the base people have already moved over to the Reform Party. So now, in typical clown world fashion, we've ended up in a situation where, the Tory membership that have been begging them to move right for decades at this point are actually now probably going to tell them, please move left. And I'm not even joking about that. There's actually a decent chance that eventually the Lib Dems and Tories just join up forces. Because what's the meaningful difference between them in the end? At the moment, it's just the Tories are a bit more open to try and move towards Reform, but I don't think that's going to last forever.
Reform Party have the solutions. They're a one-trick pony. one policy, one person.
Yeah, as I keep saying in other videos, it's not exactly accurate to say this anymore. Danny Kruger seems to be absolutely everywhere talking about policy. He was on the IEA panel the other day talking about benefits. He's been on plenty of interviews. Obviously, Zia Youssef's absolutely everywhere at the same time as head of policy.
Are you worried about Nigel Farage at all?
I think anyone here who says that they're not would be lying.
Yeah, this is generally the feel of everyone. Yeah, Nigel Farage is killing us, and we kind of hate him for it.
Do you think if you're a young person on the right, you'd be better served by Reform UK than the Conservative Party?
Better served by Reform, yes, because they want more free markets, as opposed to Kemi. I mean, they're talking about larger tax cuts, and hopefully they'll blame the immigrants for a lot of stuff, but cut a lot of state spending at the same time.
You're a bit too honest there. The Tory line is that Reform is absolutely full of socialists, and this guy's just admitted, oh, actually, they're clearly a bit more free market with their tax cuts and cuts to state spending, even though obviously there's some rises. Yeah, it's hilarious. When people are honest about the actual situation over at Tory conference, the inevitable question they all need to be asked is, why are you here?
You know, I do wonder, okay, supposing that Kemi is, let's say, 20, 30, 40, 50 seats away from the magic number of 326, what sort of pound of flesh would Farage looking to be, extracting?
You do, of course, get the complete delusional people like this. I don't know if he's keeping up with politics, but at the moment, Tories only just about have 100 seats, and pretty much every poll predicts that they are going to lose a majority of them. I have no idea why he's even expecting them to get even close to 275, let alone the fact that they're probably not even going to get 75 at the next election. Yeah, there are still completely deluded people here. Typically, they either work for the Tory party or, as I said before, it's their entire social life.
If things don't change soon, we're done.
Do you think this is nearly it for the Conservative Party? You're not bouncing back?
Not at the minute, no. I think we're done for a decade at this rate.
For a decade, I think there's a very good chance that you're almost done for good. You just become a worse Lib Dems. With a weird Margaret Thatcher paint job, we're moving on to some of the stalls that were there. For some reason, listen, I'm a fan of Margaret Thatcher, but even I think that this is too far. They have in almost glass sarcophaguses her famous clothing from various speeches and the time she was in a tank. This is really weird. This isn't even something that I would dream up in a million years of something that would look like good optics. The problem you have is that this is kind of like a cargo cult. They don't really understand what Thatcherism was and what made it great, because it was a little more than, free market everything and close down the coal mines and fight the unions. None of which, by the way, they actually did over the past 14 years, but now they're trying to somehow recapture the spirit in a way that's, it's just the aesthetics. And it's not even good aesthetics, it's just her dress. And it's not only her dresses, by the way, but you can get a portrait taken of you to be put on the Margaret Thatcher mosaic or the Maggie mosaic. Sorry, but these are the people that were going on about Andrea Jenkins coming out at the Reform conference in a sequin dress, singing a song that she wrote to pump up the crowd. It's very ITV, it's very Saturday Night Takeaway, and they all called it cringe. I'm sorry, it doesn't even compare to this. Andrea, at the very least, had some entertainment value. This is just weird. I have to say, though, they did have some clever trinkets, such as the back of the Fag Packet Reform Manifesto. The funny thing being is that pretty much everything apart from cozying up to Putin, which isn't even true of Reform, is true of the Tory party over the past 14 years. Again, it's not that it's a good attack on Reform, I think it's just a neat little clever trinket. But unfortunately, the Tories have to embarrass themselves a little bit, where one of the trinkets was a chocolate bar, and it says, "When Labour negotiates, Britain loses." Yes, they spelt Britain wrong, which, I'll be honest with you, I can't really have a go at many people for spelling mistakes like this, because I make them all the time, even on my thumbnails. However, I'm a guy that's doing this as a hobby. This is a party that's worth millions and millions and millions of pounds, and you can't be making basic mistakes like this. But as I say, it's funny more than anything else. Anyway, when it comes to where you know the real opposition to the left are, it's, well, where the protesters are. And obviously you had plenty outside of the Reform Conference. The only ones that I have been able to find at the Tory conference are those that want to pedestrianise the M6. Yes, the Tories are taken so seriously that their protesters are literally trolling them and not at all making a serious political statement about them being racist or anything like that. That's how far they've fallen. Reform of all the oxygen. Will it necessarily stay like that forever? No, not necessarily. Is it from current trajectories? Yes, but things can change. So the battle is not over for Reform, is my point. Anyway, there was a bit of a hubbub about Robert Jenrick complaining that he's not seeing any white faces in certain Birmingham neighbourhoods and started talking about parallel societies. Again, it's all good stuff to talk about. It's just a shame he did absolutely nothing about it when he actually had power to do something about it as, say, I don't know, immigration minister. Oh, but the bureaucracy... Yeah, sorry, Parliament's been sovereign since Brexit. They had every opportunity to actually instill the counter-revolution against Blairism, but, well, they're only against Blairism when it means votes for them. So yeah, do not trust these people. Anyway, Jenrick was hosting a fringe event and people were very happy to announce that it was packed out. It's based in an alcove somewhere in the building, and people are basically very happy to be packed up like sardines in a room that can fit about 30 of them. It's, as I said before, it's quite clear that the Tory line is to say, oh God, just try and make everything look packed out. And they can only really make it look packed out if it's in a small room like this. Ex-Tory MP Simon Clarke trying to as well be a bit more open about the fact that people are being snide about how empty it is, posting a picture this morning of yet another small room fitting about, I don't know, 50 to 60 people, something like that, for his fringe event, and you'll notice that pretty much everyone, especially on the front row, is on their phones. And that is because at this time Reform had an awful lot of defection news, but we'll get into that at the end because it's once again quite humiliating for the Tory party. Anyway, while all this is going on, Martin Daubeny was informed that the Conservatives will drop the national anthem from their conference this year, and Kemi Badenoch instead wants pop music, which really isn't helping with all the arguments I made to say, oh no, Kemi Badenoch is British, she married a Brit. Well, I mean, Reform didn't exactly do well at singing the national anthem on stage, I'll be honest with that. But at least they were showing clear signs of patriotism. What's Kemi Badenoch doing here? You cannot drop the national anthem for pop music and expect to be seen as representing Britain. That's crazy. Assuming it's true, obviously, it just says it claims it, but knowing Kemi Badenoch, she's absolutely nuts. Anyway, Kemi is just a strange person. Because while the party is absolutely floundering and everyone has kind of come to accept, or at least is on the road to acceptance, that the Tory party is not going to be the powerful force it has been for centuries in British politics, she's inviting MPs to lunch, effectively, I assume, to chat about issues and get a plan together. At the lunch, the MPs get a platter of cold sandwiches. And, well, Matt Chorley, the journalist here, pointed out that Badenoch doesn't think that sandwiches are real food, and one of the MPs replied, well, they get the sandwiches, Kemi has something hot brought in. It's just incredible. The polite thing to do is have the same thing as your guests, not give them a tier of food below yours, especially if you yourself don't think sandwiches are real food and are basically there for the peasant class. It's not good. And as I say, I don't even think things would be necessarily better under Jenrick. Anyway, the Tories very much showing off that they are just a social club where, well, everyone is orbiting the dear leader for, well, let's just be frank here, for little other reason than to try and get a step up inside the party's greasy pole. On top of that, I keep seeing tweets like this, where Luke Robert Black, who is head of the LGBT Conservatives, is effectively showing off how good their party's going to be. Boy, do we have a night planned for you. Tory MP DJs, live entertainment, plenty of booze, fun and music. It's the only way to close out the Tory conference. Quote tweeting LGBT Tories, with James cleverly announcing that it's going to be a closing party that you can't miss. As I say, for some years now, and especially looking back in hindsight, the whole thing has been a social club where they think they literally cannot lose, and they still seem to be trying to ride that wave while basically the whole building's burning down around them. They lost something crazy like 75% of their London campaign managers. All around the country, as we'll get into, there's defections going on. That also does not help with your campaigning, and it's going to be devastating when it comes to trying to get votes. They're slowly having to morph into a regional party, and they've not even noticed. Anyway, as mentioned before, an awful lot of the activists are literally just there for the social engagement and it being a social club. Here you have Chris Rose and Emily Hewitson, two people that frankly I don't really think are interested to any extent in policy. I think they're just like dunking on people on Twitter, getting invites onto GB News, Talk TV and other political shows, and just thrive on the attention, which is fine. There are people like this. But if you're ever wondering why X, Y or Z person has not yet crossed the floor to reform, this is pretty much the only reason left. It's going to be too late to defect to reform and look like you're serious about saving the country soon. I'm talking about weeks, maybe months if you're lucky. Reform pretty much have a foothold on being, if not the next party in government, at the very least being in opposition. They are looking to dominate Wales along with Plaid Cymru, which, by the way, the campaign against Plaid Cymru is basically just going to be, oh, they're just going to be Labour but in green, because they have been quite open about working with Labour to keep reform out. So if you basically want continuity Labour, vote Plaid. And I really do mean it, by the way. These people have nowhere else to go but the Tory party. Emily Hewitson is not popular outside of it. She went on Big Brother and was kicked out in 24 hours simply for being within the Tory circles. I'm not even joking. They have nowhere else to go. They could jump over to Reform, but basically I think these people can't make friends outside the Tory party. I think that's it. I think part of the reason for that is that the Tory party is full of weirdos who have a very good ability to be fake for television and the internet. Emily Hewitson made this just blatantly obvious before the conference. The reason I'm still a member of the Conservative Party isn't because I am happy at how they have acted in government. In fact, I'm dismayed. It's because I am a Conservative, small c, all capitalised though, and this should be the Conservative Party. It's literally just because, oh, it's got a name I like. It's like saying I'm anti-fascist, therefore I'm joining Antifa. It doesn't make sense. I'm fighting for the party to return to its core values. At this point, it becomes untenable, and I will leave. Sorry, I just reject all this. There was one reason and one reason alone at this point in time to stay in the Conservative Party, because I just don't... You're either deluded that you are going to make a comeback, which I just cannot see happening. I can't see a right-wing renaissance of thought happening within the Conservative Party. No, it's just because your entire social life revolves around being a Tory. That's why. You make it fairly obvious. And that's fine if you want to do it, but my plea to you would be, please don't get in the way of reform while they're actually trying to make change then. That would be my one plea. But they're not going to do that because half the social life comes from basically being snobby about reform, so go ahead, I guess. Anyway, these are the type of people who are bigging up Mr. Rupert Lowe, of course, who was out flying an England flag in Great Yarmouth and even put up a few flags, and they riff off current events, effectively to try and get on Rupert Lowe's good side. Because as I keep having to tell people, Rupert Lowe's entire political presence at the moment is literally just, I really like my constituents, everyone else can just use my name for whatever they want, and a load of people are using it to try and revive the Tories. Honestly, they might actually get so desperate they let him join. On the other hand, though, there's an awful lot of Lib Dems in the party that probably really don't want him there. It's going to be quite entertaining whatever happens, but it's hard to say where I'd put my money on where it's going to go, to be honest, but well, he was defending indefinite leave to remain the other day, so God knows where he's going to go with it. But as I say, these are the types of people who are staying in the Tory party, people who are basically a bit strange, can't really make friends outside of the Tory party, and so they're stuck there forever. That's a big reason, by the way, that Suella Braverman has decided to stick with the Tory party. Anyway, if you want a real uniparty moment, two journalists have recently announced that they are joining the Conservative Party. First is Matthew Syed, who I actually quite enjoy him on the BBC Radio 4 and Times Radio and his comments in the Times, but he's joined the Conservative Party after standing as a Labour candidate back, to be fair, it was 24 years ago in 2001, but if you really want an example of a uniparty moment, it's Matthew Syed, who has slowly moved from Labour to Lib Dem and then obviously to the Tories. This is, of course, despite the fact that the Tories are totally moving to the right. And then there is Tom McPhail, who I believe has been an independent political commentator who I think has mainly been working with think tanks to talk about the problem with pensions, and he's joined the Tory party, who are absolutely committed to keeping the triple lock, which he's complained about. Yeah, as I say, the whole thing seems to be a social club, and people joining them are, well, doing it for strange reasons. Matthew Syed especially. A sharp leftward turn in politics has put us in a debt crisis. Yeah, we're already in a debt crisis, that was the problem, and he's claiming that the Tories are trying to get the Saints centre, despite the fact that, as I said before, Their spending promises are very similar to that of Reform's anyway, in terms of the amount of money it's actually going to cost. It's just crazy. It's crazy. It's literally just snobbery about joining Reform because they're not mainstream enough. Anyway, moving on to a bit of a secret ballot of how the Tory members actually think. Going into it, half of the members think Badenoch should not be leader for the next election. This is so much like Keir Starmer as well, by the way. It's incredible how much they mirror each other. You've got a membership that have absolutely no trust whatsoever in their top brass, and yet everyone on the internet and who's an influencer for these parties just has to pretend everything's going okay. The whole thing's falling apart. 46% say she should be the leader for the next election. These are not punters, this is the party faithful. 61% of them think she's doing well. Indeed, she's more popular with them than Starmer is with his members, but 30% of those who voted for her last year think she's doing well and that she should go. Which is so funny. It's like, yeah, Kemi's doing, she's doing well, but she needs to go. Again, it's the classic Tories are just regiciding. They just can't help but keep deposing their leader because they're not perfect. But then you had Boris Johnson, obviously, who was doing quite well, and a lot of people wanted him to go quite early on. It took quite a while for him to go. It wasn't Boris Wave that got him gone. It was the fact that he ate some cake in his home for his birthday, but it was COVID. I don't like Boris Johnson, don't get me wrong, but he was absolutely regicided for no reason whatsoever. It was ridiculous. Tim Shipman goes on, if there was a head-to-head between them, Tory members say they would now vote for Robert Jenrick. Jenrick beats pretty much everyone, and as I say, I think he would still be overseeing the death of the Tory party because you basically need a Tony Blair figure to do that, and Robert Jenrick is absolutely not the man for that. And finally on polling, 64% of Tory members want a pact with Reform, not standing candidates against Farage's people, 31% are against that. In other words, they want a complete reversal of how it worked in 2019. Here would be my suggestion with Mr Farage, just don't do it. There's a good chance they won't have enough people to stand as candidates anyway, given that Kemi Badenoch has decided it's a good idea to tell her MPs either you have to leave the ECHR with us or you're not going to be able to stand as an MP. But, well, we'll see about that. 46% want a full-blown merger, which will effectively abolish the party, so what's the point in that? And again, don't do it. And 73% would welcome a coalition with Reform, and just 6% would put Labour back in. 93% would take Farage before Starmer in number 10. This is existential, as I say. More than half the members are basically begging Farage to let them live. Do you think he's going to do that after 2019? Obviously not. Which brings me on to, frankly, the biggest news of the whole weekend. Because on the first day of the conference, the one thing they didn't want to happen happened. Badenoch donor defects to Reform on first day of Tory conference. Mark Gallagher, who helped fund her leadership campaign last year, joins Nigel Farage's party. It's just over. That is implying an awful lot of funding that was going the Tories' way is no longer going their way. In fact, it's going Reform's way. And it was so much worse today. Because Reform threw out quite early in the morning that we should all keep an eye on the social media feeds from about 7 in the morning onwards. And long story short, it was 20 posts like this. Welcome to Reform UK, councillor X, Y or Z, Debbie Solomon in this case, with a nice picture, a nice graphic overlaid, and they posted about every 10 minutes 20 of these, which means that for over 3 hours they were just drip feeding while the Tory party conference was being set up for day 2, news of defections, and, well, I don't think that this will be the end of it. I think tomorrow there will even be bigger news of defections, and then you never know, the day after we might even get an MP. They're building up to something. First day, it was a donor, not massive news. 20 councillors move over in one day? Okay, bigger news. You'd expect it to build up over time, while Tories effectively are on the path to just try and ignore the massive dragon that is currently eating away at our building and vote share. And James Heal of The Spectator reporting on this said, among the defectors today are Richard Holden's former SPAD Robbie Lamas and ex-CCHQ regional press officer Denise Howard. So it's not just councillors that they can kind of ignore, it's people who were, well, again, getting higher on the greasy pole. Nothing compared to Danny Kruger, but as said, when Danny Kruger moved over, that was very much the beginning of the end, and you can expect a lot more defections after that, but they'll try and spread out the news as time goes on. And honestly, maybe after next week, maybe that's when they'll get the MP, or MPs possibly to defect. as they can get the media on board to find out what's going on. And having said all this, this is all very much hidden. People don't know about this. Even councillors that I've been talking to, they said, no, this is all a surprise to me. Nobody knew about Danny Kruger moving over, by the way. Head office have been very, very good at hiding all these defections, I have to say, because my sources are certainly not getting advice of this in advance. Anyway, Reform finished off today's news with, a graphic showing Kemi's phone, where obviously you've got the news of 20 Tory councillors defecting, a Tory councillor letting her know that she's defected to Reform, CCHQ press officers going on about the fact that the chocolate bar was spelt wrong with the word Brittany, the events team on Slack mentioning how there's a lot of empty seats and, well, a lot of job offers to go out to seat fillers, with a funny little reminder saying you are enough right at the bottom. They got an awful lot of memes in one graphic there, and as I say, I don't even think this is necessarily going to be the big news of the week, so expect more tomorrow. And I know a couple of Tories who said, oh, this all seems a bit harsh. Well, to be honest with you, you got to bear in mind the mindset, especially with Reform, is that you have betrayed the country, and, well, there isn't quite anything like the wrath of a lover scorned, is there? So here I am cheering this on, frankly. Let's go back to 0 seats, or, well, actually a better thing that has been pointed out to me today might be maybe just keep 20 of the wets, so that they can watch as a Reform government actually fix all the issues that they cause. That could be hilarious. But as I say, many things can change in the next 4 years, or 3.5 years, something like that, so let's not rest on our laurels. Plus, that's pretty much for their audience on Twitter anyway. That's to rage bait the Tories and, well, get people like me cheering them on. Your average person won't see anything like this. They'll just see a headline saying, bunch of Tories have defected today, which is still a headline that the Tories will not want. Right. Anyway, with that, I think I will leave it there. So tonight it is Tosh Talk. No, it's Tosh News, sorry. We're doing the newscast. On Thursday, it's a gaming stream, and then there should also be a Wolves of Westminster podcast out on Friday as usual. Videos out as and when I can make them, of course. If you enjoy what I do, subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, all that good stuff. You can also become a channel member or leave super chats or super thanks in any stream or video that I do. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.